If you're not deliberate about how you speak, people will respect you less, but not in the ways that you probably expect. You see, you probably expect it to be like if you speak quietly or use filler words, then people won't respect you as much. What I'm saying actually runs deeper than that, in the sense that average people make a lot of specific mistakes that are so subtle and commonplace that you probably don't even realize that you're doing them in the first place. And when you make these kinds of mistakes, it makes people perceive you differently and it makes them look down on you when you speak. You see, if you're an average person, they're completely fine to have. You can click off this video and just ignore everything that I'm about to say. But if you're someone who's ambitious, who wants to have influence and impact behind the words that they say, who wants to make more money, speaking without these mistakes will undoubtedly help you in all of those areas. Because once I was able to notice these mistakes in my own life and minimize them to the best of my ability, it allowed me to build 1, trust, 2, respect, and 3, authority with people that I spoke to. Whether they made more money than me or whether they didn't, or whether they were older than me or whether they were younger than me or whatever position they were, I was always able to benefit from cutting out these mistakes. And in this video, I'm going to break down what those specific mistakes are and how you can overcome them. Now, the first mistake that people make that makes them appear low status when they speak to people is actually in your head. You see, 99% of communication is actually up here, not just in your voice and your mouth. You see, the way that a lot of people approach improving their speaking skills and the way a lot of people teach it is that they just throw out a bunch of different tips and random tactics that you can use and then hope that what you tell them or what they learn sticks. The only problem with that is that if you don't address the underlying reasons why you're making those mistakes, none of them will stick long term. Maybe you might try it a couple of times, but then after that, it's just gonna be something that you forget. So the way that I like to approach it is by focusing on the deeper reasons behind why you make these mistakes in the first place. So in this case, the reason why you make a lot of mistakes when you're speaking to people that makes you appear low status is because you place other people above you. And you probably heard that and go like, no, I don't do that. That's not something that I do. But the thing is, it's not something that you consciously think. To that, you might end up responding by saying, well, I don't see my 3-year-old cousin as above me when I speak to them. Or I don't see my best friend as above me when I speak to them. And that's true, you don't. The difference here is that when you're speaking to someone who you'll end up naturally thinking is above you, is when you have a little bit of stakes to the conversation or the overall context of the conversation that you're having with that person. So for example, say you're running a business and you're speaking to a client. Technically, there's a little bit of stakes there because if you do a bad job for this client and you don't communicate your points well, then you might lose money if they stop working with you. Or if you're a YouTuber and you make a post or a video and it's bad, and your points are really bad in that video, then you'll get less views and you won't be able to get as much influence with your video. It's stuff like that. So in those kinds of situations, you would place the person that you're speaking to above you. It could even be an extreme example, like you're speaking to your favorite celebrity and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope they don't see me as weird. But that subconscious thought that you're having is being communicated in the way that you speak to them without you even realizing that it is. And this is what you need to get rid of when you speak to people in these kinds of situations, because it's so subconscious and something that you won't even realize is happening. You need to replace those subconscious thoughts with manual thoughts, thoughts that make you at the same level, or even in certain cases, like for example, if you're in a leadership position, above them. So what you need to understand to be able to overcome this is that every single person that you meet is more or less to some extent the same as you. Of course, there's gonna be differences, but generally, for example, if I was talking to someone who was way older than I was, the only difference between me and them is the fact that they were born, say, for example, a few decades before I was, and they had different experiences. But if I was born in that exact same time, in that exact same house that they were born in, and in the exact same experiences that they had, then I would probably be in a pretty similar position to them too. Of course, this doesn't mean that you need to diminish every great thing that this person has done, but it at least puts it into perspective And it puts the idea of, I'm actually not that different from this person. They also eat, they breathe, they sleep, they go to the bathroom, they do all of those different things. So in reality, there's not that much different between me and them. And once you think this consciously before you go into one of these conversations, you go like, well, it's not the end of the world if it doesn't go well. It's fine. I can mess up. I can speak to this person like I normally would because they're just like me. They're just another regular person. So if you consciously think this the next time you go into one of these high stakes interactions, you're going to perform so much better than if you just went in on autopilot and then ended up naturally placing this person as above you in your head's own weird social hierarchy. You see what I mean? So once you improve on this, it's going to do wonders for these next mistakes that I'm going to go over because you now have built the actual right foundation for these other tips to stick. The next thing is something that people actually do a lot because they think that it makes them seem more intelligent and smarter when they speak. But in reality, it just makes them look worse when they talk. And that is answering questions instantly. Now, how exactly would that make you appear worse when you speak? Because, well, if you're responding fast, then doesn't it mean that you know more about what it is that you're going to say? Not exactly. In some cases, it can be that you genuinely just know what to say and you're really passionate about what it is. But you need to look at why you're answering fast. Because this is something that I used to do a lot when I was younger. And I would answer fast because I thought it would make me look like I actually knew what I was saying. But in actuality, I wasn't giving myself enough time to actually think about what I needed to say. And I would end up jumbling up some ridiculous answers or whatever it is that they were saying. And then by the end of my rambling mess, I would finally get my points together. But by then they've already lost the plot. They don't even know what it is that I'm saying at that point. So it means nothing. So you need to realize, how much time are you actually taking to formulate your answers when someone asks you something? Because a lot of the time, people don't even give themselves enough time. You don't even need that much time. All you need is a 1 to 3 second pause when someone asks you a question. Why? Because it's going to do two things for you. One, the obvious thing is that it's going to give you time to think. And when you have time to think, you have time to think of a better response, and you'll sound a lot smarter than if you just try to pretend to be smart by responding fast. But two, is that it actually changes the way that the person sees you in their eyes when they hear you speak. Because when you take a pause when they ask you a question, it shows that you're putting deliberate thought into how you're answering. And when it shows that you're putting deliberate thought into it, what that does is it signals to them, oh, this person is taking what I'm saying really seriously. I'm going to want to listen more. There's a little bit of tension there. There's a little bit of suspense into what you're going to say. Don't be afraid that someone's going to interrupt you if you take a second to answer or whatever. It's not the end of the world. But when you take a couple of seconds and pause, your answers automatically have more weight because they have to wait to hear what you're going to say. That was a part. That was pretty cool. But generally, if you take more time, people will respect you more. If you just rush into an answer and you're like younger me who used to jumble his words and trip over his words and say and ah and use filler words a lot, it's going to make you a lot more likely to make those mistakes in that fast response that you just gave. Because we need time to think, especially if you're someone like me. I needed time when I was speaking to people, or just in general, I still need time when I speak to people. So give yourself that time. You're allowed to give yourself that time. Don't steal it from yourself. Now, another thing that's kind of related to that is when someone asks you a question, this is the third mistake, and that's you don't communicate when you don't actually have an answer to what it is that they're asking you. So for example, this is something that used to happen to me when I was a lot younger. Someone would ask me about some random pop culture event or something like that, say some TV show. I hadn't heard of it, ever. And I would just pretend to know what it is. So they would go like, oh yeah, what do you think of the new blank season? And I'd go like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. I actually liked it a lot. I would just lie because I thought that would sound better than me saying that I actually didn't know what it was. And then guess what would happen? One of the two things. One, they would either catch on and see that I didn't know what I was talking about and then roast me for it, and then I would get in trouble with them anyway. Or two, my answer would just be nonsensical and they would just change the subject anyway because they're like, well, what is this guy saying? That made no sense at all. So it was a lose-lose situation for me. Literally the only options that could come out of that were bad responses. But instead, if I just said, I don't know what that is, then I could just have a little bit more of an interesting conversation and they'll appreciate the honesty. So the way you can apply this into your own life is, say for example, you're coaching someone on something. Say you were some YouTuber and you're coaching and someone asks you something that you don't know. You might think it might look really bad if you don't have the answer because you're supposed to be the expert. You're supposed to know everything. But people will trust you more even if you don't have that information because you're just being transparent with them. So there's ways to communicate that you don't know something without looking less intelligent when you do. There's 3 ways. The first is to just straight up say, I don't know. That will just make people trust you a little bit more. But if you want to be a little bit more poised with it, there's other ways you can go about it. So for example, you can say, I haven't actually thought of that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And then from there, they can give you a little bit more context. And maybe you might actually find that you do know the answer. And then if you don't, then you can use option number 3, which is the, I actually don't know about that. But when I do know about it, I'm going to look into that, then I'll get back to you on that answer. That's going to be so much more powerful than just rambling your way through some answer, trying to pretend that you know everything. Because the person that tries their best to front and make it seem like they know everything is going to be the person that everyone sees through and everyone has no respect for. But when you're honest with yourself and you give yourself room to be not perfect, then people will respect you for that. You don't need to be perfect in every single situation. You just need to clearly communicate that you know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. Now, if you want additional personalized help from me when it comes to improving your speaking skills in your content creation or in your business, click the top link in the description and I'll personally help you with that. But on to the next point. The next thing is that you speak too much. This is a huge mistake that people make, and it's similar to the answering questions instantly in the sense where you do it probably because you think that it'll help other people to see you as more intelligent. But what it actually does is it shoots yourself in the foot because you're just saying words that don't actually mean anything and that don't actually add value. Essentially what I'm saying is just get to the point. Because yes, sometimes it is important to speak for a little bit longer. Maybe you have a longer speech that you need to give, or you're in a YouTube video, so there's technically no time limit. But people's attention spans are a lot shorter these days, so you need to make sure that you can actually contribute what you're going to say in an efficient amount of time. Now, you also need to understand why you're doing this. Because for me, the reason why I used to ramble a lot was because I had this anxiety that the people that I was speaking to weren't actually listening to what it was that I was saying. So I constantly felt the need to repeat what I said before or what I said a couple of minutes ago. And yes, repetition can be useful in some cases to really drill a point in. When you do it 3, 4, 5, 6 times, it gets repetitive and people will stop paying attention. So it's a bit of a balance. But generally, as a rule of thumb, if you're someone who does ramble a little bit, you can probably reduce what you're saying by at least 30 to 40% and still be able to get the exact same amount of value, maybe even more value out. It really just comes down to making sure that you're doing what I said before about thinking about what it is that you're going to say before you say it so that you can figure out how the best way to articulate that point is without needing to spend too much time actually saying it. Because if you respect the time of the people that you're speaking to, they'll respect you and you won't be seen as this person that desperately is trying to legitimize what they're saying by speaking for as long as possible. Now, on the topic of legitimizing what you're saying, this leads us to the next mistake that people make, and that is delegitimizing your words. So what exactly does that mean? It means that you make it so that every sentence that you say has less weight and less impact behind it. And what words actually do this? It's actually words and phrases that you use all the time. It's things like, I think, I guess, to be honest. Phrases like that end up diminishing the actual impact of what you're saying. Think about it like this. Imagine if you went to watch a YouTube video on improving your fitness, and you had two different videos that you watched. In the first one, the YouTuber went like, I think that you should go to the gym about 3 days per week. And then I think that you should also take creatine. And then I think that you should be on an upper lower split, I guess. Or if you had someone that said, you should go to the gym 3 times per week, you should take creatine, and you should be on an upper lower split. They said the exact same things, but one of them seemed a lot less sure of themselves when they were speaking. And the reason why is because they use these qualifiers that you probably use all of the time. And when you use these qualifiers, it makes it seem as if you're a lot less sincere in what it is that you're saying. On the concept or on the topic of sincerity, another thing that people do is they say, to be honest. I hate this phrase and I use it a lot too, and I need to stop. But the reason why it's such a bad phrase to use is, what do you think you're communicating when you say to be honest before a sentence? It kind of implies that everything else that you said before wasn't you being honest. It's a subtle thing, but it does make a difference in the way that people perceive you when you speak. If you cut these out, you will have 1,000 times more conviction, and people will lean on every single word that you're going to say because it sounds less like an opinion or less like this thing that you randomly thought of and more like an actual fact. Not an opinion, a statement. And that's what's going to make people actually care about what it is that you're saying. Now, another way that people delegitimize their words without even realizing it is not just in the words and the phrases that they use, but in how they say them. So, what a lot of people do is they use what's called upwards inflection at the end of their sentences. So, they'll be talking, say it's a speech or a presentation. I see this a lot in presentations, especially in school. And there would be people where they would give presentations and they'd be reading off the slides. You shouldn't be doing that, but they'll be reading off the slides and they would finish every sentence like this. And they go like, yeah, so if you look at this, then if you have this specific thing and then it does this, and then the next point is that this. What do you think you're communicating when you speak like that? Because what does it sound like? It sounds like a question. So, by ending every sentence as if it were a question, it sounds like you're questioning everything that you're saying, and it sounds like every single word that you say, every sentence that you say, is something that you're unsure about. Now, I'm not entirely sure where this came from. If I had to guess, it's probably from back when people were in school. Teacher asked them a question and they go like, 6? And they answer it like that because they're waiting for the validation from the teacher that they're right. And a lot of people probably never actually grew out of that. So when they speak, they try and speak as if they're getting the validation from the people that they're speaking to that what they're saying is right. But they're doing it without even realizing that. So if you just end your sentences on a downward inflection like this, then it'll make it a little bit more clear and you'll sound like you have more conviction when you speak compared to if you ended every sentence like this. You get the point? Now, the last mistake that people make when they speak that makes them appear lower status is that they don't know how to handle mistakes. So when it comes to handling mistakes, you have 3 types of people. You have the professionals who are really good at what they do. You have people who are just regular people and they don't really know anything because they're not trying to improve anything. And you have people in the middle who are trying to improve to become a professional, and they're doing that consciously. You can apply this to any kind of context, but in this context, we're talking about speaking. So say you have a professional speaker and they make a mistake during a speech. How do you think they're going to react? They're probably just going to go like, it's whatever. I'm fine 95% of the time. So they're not going to care and they're just going to brush past it like it never happened. Now, if a regular person makes a mistake during a speech, they don't even notice that they've even made a mistake because they don't even know what the mistake is. So they just brush past it like nothing happened. Then you have someone in the middle and they're trying to improve to become a professional. Probably you. How exactly do you think they respond in these situations? Someone like this in this situation would make a mistake and they would hyperfixate on it. They would go like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake again. Ugh. Or they go like, dang, I can't do this. Or they'll make a big deal out of it. And when they make a big deal out of it, it makes it more likely to happen again. It messes up the flow of whatever conversation or speech that they were giving was. And then when they mess up their flow, then it becomes a lot harder to pick it up again. And then it ends up just being a downward slope from there. So, where do you think you should be when it comes to how you handle your mistakes? Handle your mistakes like the professional, where you don't see them as that big a deal because everyone's human. Everyone's going to make mistakes here and there. It's a normal thing. But you don't see it as this big thing that's happening because you're trying to improve. You see it as this thing that just naturally happens because you're a person and it's okay. To be honest, I said to be honest, but if I were having someone speak to me or something like that, and they were 100% perfect when they spoke, it would probably be a little bit uncanny. You'd be like, wow, this person is really, really good, but like, it's kind of hard to relate to this person. And of course, you don't need to relate to people every single time that you speak, but making mistakes is fine. Of course, it's fine to improve on your mistakes, like literally what we're doing here. But if you hyperfixate on them when you do make those mistakes, when you're actually out in the wild doing your presentation or doing your YouTube video or whatever it is that you're doing, then one, it makes people focus on it a lot more and it makes it seem a lot bigger than it is. And then two, you make more mistakes afterwards. I learned this from when I joined a singing group a few years ago. And I remember they really drilled this into us, going like, if you make a mistake on stage, don't act like you made a mistake. Keep smiling and keep singing as if nothing happened. Why? Because if you're up there on stage and you make a mistake and you go like, ooh, or you make a weird face, people in the audience will notice. So if you don't make a big deal about your mistakes, the people that you're speaking to won't make a big deal out of them anyway. But there is a little bit of nuance to this. Because if you make a mistake that's big enough for the audience to hyperfixate on it after you make the mistake and then stop paying attention to what you're saying because they're so focused on what you said, then it's going to be a bit of an issue for you. So say you're making a YouTube video about reading and how good it is for you. And you're telling a story and you go like, oh yeah, the other day I was reading this book. But instead of saying, the other day I was reading this book, you say, oh yeah, the other day I was eating this book and then I had this other story. What's going to happen there is if the audience perceives that mistake to be big enough, they're just going to hyperfixate on it and go like, he just said he was eating a book, what in the world? And then the next sentence that you say after that isn't going to be picked up by them because they were focusing on that mistake. Now, if you're a YouTuber, you might have times where people might comment about it and then it might improve your, the algorithm or whatever it is. But generally, it will be a lot more helpful for you if you address it there and validate them for going like, okay, yeah, that was a little bit funny. And then you guide them back to what it is that you were talking about before. So if I were in that same situation with the guy talking about eating his book, I would go like, oh yeah, so the other day I was eating my book and, eating my book. It was actually pretty tasty. Anyway, so I was reading my book and this is what happened. So you maybe make a little joke about it or you just acknowledge it and go like, that was dumb, and then keep going. It's completely fine. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. Essentially, don't make a big deal out of mistakes that you make. But when you do need to address them, again, do it in a very casual, nonchalant way. Just keep moving and people will be able to be guided back to what it is that you're going to say. And then two, they'll respect you more instead of you being this person that one is over focusing on the things that they're saying and the mistakes that they're making. And then two, you'll seem more human. You don't have to be this person that's always trying to be perfect, because the person that's always trying to be perfect is the person that's perceived as way less perfect than everybody else. And it's going to make you seem low status when you do that. So if you get rid of all of these mistakes, whether it's placing people above you in your head, or whether it's answering questions instantly, or speaking too much, not communicating when you don't know an answer, delegitimizing your words, or handling mistakes wrong. Once you get rid of these mistakes, you'll be able to be perceived as much higher status when you speak, because you're speaking in a way where you actually show that you have respect for yourself. And that is what makes people want to listen. Because if you have respect for yourself, people will have respect for you too. So again, that's all that I have. If you need help improving your speaking skills for your business or for your content creation, click the top link and I'll help you with that personally. But outside of that, I hope this helped and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And remember, don't overthink it, because you're probably a lot better at speaking than you think that you are. Have a good one.